starting point in raising this issue in the academic field in a way which starts to make discussing stolen babies and adoption frauds a legitimate issue of academic focus. The research that we've done over the last 2 years was really started by consciousness of the Beba affair in Serbia, associated with Zorica Jovanovic. And this gave us the realization that there was an area of criminological behaviour that was not being addressed by academia or faculty, and in many cases was being deliberately marginalised or cast as the type of thing that one was not meant to be recognising or talking about. Through a fortuitous link to Anna, we were able to agree an arrangement where very kindly, very many families went through the often difficult process of reliving their experiences and talking to essentially a group of unconnected academics and laying bare many facts in circumstances where we are profoundly thankful for the trust that they have placed in us and that we hope to return to them through the work that we do in the academic field. The research team included myself. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at a British University, Bath Spa. Sandy Vizdarovic, who many of you will already know, was involved in the research from the outset. Alexander Carswell, whose credentials are here, but he acted as an additional researcher, and Eliza Bachman as well, who is here. And as I go through the presentation, I will talk about the overall dynamics of stolen babies in Serbia that we have witnessed. Alexander will talk about some of the legal implications of the evidence that we have seen, and Eliza will give a short few thoughts on the other broader implications of where this research takes us. But I would emphasise this is one small part of a very much larger and wider dynamic. And we're very conscious of that because of the discussions that we have had with all of you, even just in the last few hours. Next slide, please. So you'll all be familiar with the Centre Beba. This was where the research originally took place. Next slide, please. And I am inclined to think of this research as rather like the murals that have been painted on the streets of Roma by the personnel of the centre. For a long time, it has not been possible to recognise this type of criminality in academic circles. And in the same way that the centre took their message out onto the street, raising awareness in Roma and making people who had not previously thought about this problem aware of it, the article and the academic work that we are doing, we hope, is a bit like a mural in that field. What it will do is make people who were unaware or in denial of this problem in a position where they must face it because there is credible academic evidence that it is happening, it is real, and it is widespread. Next slide, please. So the aims of the research were to look at child abduction from maternity and neonatal facilities because we had identified that this was very poorly represented in things like policy documents and guidance. Very rarely did you see anything, if ever, in missing persons policies that articulated that a person could go missing from a trusted institution under the care of professionals which they had a right to expect would behave with integrity towards them. We were aware also that in academia, in many cases, adoption fraud was legitimised. The academic literature said, as long as the child goes to an, inverted commas, better place, then this is not exploitation and not abuse. And we found that to be a problematic and ethically difficult position for academia to hold on this issue. And so what we had to do was to try to get an idea of a complex dynamic, something that was often so difficult for people to understand that there wasn't a word or phrase that represented it. And to present that in an academic way where academic and policy communities would recognise this as a coherent dynamic of criminality that could be referred to and further researched. Next slide, please. I won't talk too much about the methodology, except to say that this was a piece of research which was conducted on the basis of interviews. We call it qualitative research in academia, but fundamentally it involves people. And this is a story of people. And it's a story of people who have shown quite extraordinary courage and fortitude across many years. And the simple act of talking to people like me and the research team was another sacrifice that has been made by these families on top of the sacrifice that they have been asked to go through across many years and many decades. And for that, we are profoundly grateful. Next slide, please. Many of you will be familiar, but the research was conducted in Roma in March of 2024. And we conducted 31 interviews with family members and examined 13 separate cases of child abduction taking place between the 1970s and 2018. We also examined what is the tip of the iceberg of documentation associated with those cases. We probably looked at a number of hundreds of documents which are valuable academically as they allow us to verify the interview data. But this is a small element of the amount of documentary evidence that exists in this organisation and across organisations in many countries and many jurisdictions. And tying together that broader sphere of data, I think, is one of the issues that we can perhaps move forward on in this Congress today, because this is not a phenomenon that lacks an evidential base. The evidence is there, it has simply not been tied together or been permitted to be used to ensure that justice is achieved for families whose children have been stolen. Next slide, please. So, the concept that we have developed from the research is what we call EPDIA, or EPDIA. And that is early post-delivery institutional abduction. And we define that academically as the abduction of a newborn infant where they have not been released alive or dead into the custody of their birth parent or legitimate legal guardian from maternity or hospital care. And the focus of that model, not exclusively, we have aligned with medical standards to look at the theft of children from hospitals and neonatal facilities from the first minutes of birth to approximately 28 days following birth, which is the medically defined neonatal period. That said, there are cases that we have looked at that go beyond this period, and we have kept those in the research, and it is significant that this is just one small dynamic. There are many other ways that children go missing at different times after birth, and which are processed into adoption or other forms of exploitation through different means. So we're aware this is only one small part of the picture. Next slide, please. The model then that we propose is one that includes a number of stages or phases. These are not discrete. They are not completely separate from each other, and often different phases will carry over and blend in the process of coordination as the child is identified and removed from their parent. But these were the phases that we saw evidenced in all of the interviews that we did with families. And this aligns with a form of criminological theory called crime scripting. The first phase is the selection of a suitable family with a suitable child for that child to be removed and passed into the illicit market for adoption or other purposes. And here we cannot know the mind of the perpetrators because we were interviewing victims. But we can make some interpretations of the type of things that perpetrators were looking for when they selected a family and targeted them for their child to be stolen. And among those factors, we see predominantly young mothers, often very unfamiliar with the birthing process or the process of hospital administration surrounding maternity and birth. We also see people who, in relative terms, are disempowered. They are disempowered because of their social or economic status, not in all cases, but in many cases. But crucially, they are disempowered because they do not have the ability to challenge the status of a trusted profession like that of medicine or authorities like those who might be involved in the creation of identities, and do that with sufficient social capital to mean that they are able to hold those authorities to account and make them transparent for their actions. We then see a fairly complex area of preparation or pre-activity. And this is where medical and administrative staff will cooperate together, often to provide a pretext medical condition, a false medical condition that they propose the child is suffering from, but for which we find either no evidence or very contradictory evidence when we go through documentation. We see the dynamics of unusual staffing, people turning up in hospitals who we cannot see have a right to be there and who do not fit into the normal structure of maternity care. We see an unusual pattern of preterm induction. So children who are the subject of either chemically, medically induced induction, or sometimes an induction which takes place under the guise of a manual cervical examination. We see the isolation both of the mother from the child, sometimes in the same facility, and sometimes with the child being moved to other, inverted commas, specialist facilities. And we also see the isolation of the mother from other birthing mothers, so that experiences can't be compared and anomalies in the way they're treated cannot be identified. And we see this accompanied by behaviours which are coercive, psychologically coercive, deceptive, where untruths are told to the parents about their own condition and that of their child. And we see what we call neutralisation techniques. And this is where a reassuring narrative may be provided to a parent, saying, don't worry, you're young, you will be able to have other children. And that is designed to limit the potential for that parent to require or request accountability from the medical authorities. This builds up to what we call the separation phase. It may be the case that the child and the mother have already been physically separated. The child has been taken to a different facility or a different ward. But the act of legal separation takes place when the presentation of the fraudulent death notice, a death notice for a child that is still alive, is presented to the parents. And this is the point at which the criminal threshold for abduction takes place. The evidence of the desire by the perpetrator to permanently deprive the parents of the child. In these circumstances, the necessary procedures that would allow the parents to see or to receive the body of their ostensibly dead child do not take place. Parents are prevented from seeing any evidence of the child's demise. What happens concurrently or thereafter is a complex process which is in many ways a bit like money laundering, but is essentially the laundering of the identity and existence of the child. And we break it down into three phases. One is the existential fraud, a fraud which says that a live child is actually dead when they are not. The second element is what we call identity laundering, where there is the creation of a new child identity with alternate parents. And the third element we call interment fraud. And this is where the authorities have proposed that a child has died and need to create false evidence of a burial that in fact has not taken place. And through that process, the child's identity is transferred to different parents, and a series of fraudulent evidence is created that makes investigation and accountability difficult. Finally, we see the stage of suppression. And suppression is what families will describe as the long war. The attrition of going up day to day against authorities who are taking every action that they can to make investigation difficult or impossible. This includes the obstruction of evidence, telling people that documents no longer exist or have been lost in floods, or passing them between departments so that it is impossible to identify where those documents are. It includes diversion, so trying to get people to commit to different processes, in particular the process of compensation, that will mean they surrender their ability to continue investigating their child's disappearance. It involves delegitimisation, and that is presenting the concerns of parents as something which has emerged from irrational grief, or even couching this as conspiracy theorising. And I think one of the important factors of this conference is that we are now seeing that the idea that this is a conspiracy is frankly falling apart. And through that, a long campaign of attrition is waged by the state and criminal actors on the parents, which forms a very severe form of additional victimisation of those groups who have already experienced the tragic loss of their own children. And this is the EPDIA model that we have developed on the basis of research. Next slide, please. We consider this to be an organised state crime. It is impossible to put this model in place without actions across institutions and by many actors in respective professions that should hold a position of trust. And so those assemblages cannot be something which is discrete or something which is just a group of rogue, bad actors in an institution. And so criminologically, we identify this as an illicit market which is characterised by both elite participation and state criminal symbiosis, the merging of state and criminal entities to achieve an illicit aim for profit. Next slide, please. What we propose then from this model is that this forms a dynamic of structured human trafficking. And we have developed the intersection of the EPDIA model with the transnational legislation of human trafficking. This is one area of law in which we collectively may be able to exercise pressure for there to be compliance. And Alexander Carswell, who has worked for a significant amount of time in consultancy in this field in the United Kingdom and abroad, will now take you through how the EPDIA model translates into the requirements of international human trafficking legislation.